Okay, so I grew up in the golden age of teen sex comedies, but over the years, those movies did not age well. Like, there's a lot of sexism, a lot of homophobia. Not good. Today on the podcast, Bottoms, a new teen sex comedy, is making a fresh argument for the genre. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. All right, I think the reasonable place to start is this.
Tell me whatever gonna make things so complicated. I see the way you're acting like you're somebody else gets me frustrated. Life's like this, you fall and you crawl and you break and you take what you get.
That is Complicated by Avril Lavigne. It is on the soundtrack for Bottoms. Let me just tell you, when you see this in theaters, like the crowd is like, what's happening? Is Complicated really on? This is the best time ever. Bottoms is a teen sex comedy that centers queer characters, and people are calling it this generation's Heathers or Superbad or Mean Girls. The movie stars Ayo Edebiri and Rachel Sennett as best friends who start an all-girls fight club at school, but it's all a scheme to bond, but then also hopefully lose their virginities to the hot cheerleaders in the school. Bottoms comes at a really exciting time for queer shows and movies, particularly for teenagers and young people. So we've gathered a couple of brilliant writers that are joining me to talk about all of this. Mel Woods is here. Madeline Ducharme is here. What's up, everybody? So glad to have you here. Hi.
Woohoo!
So excited to be here.
This is going to be good. I can sense your energy in terms of like just like getting ready to talk about Bottoms. You guys were just like bouncing as Complicated was playing. That's the best. Okay, let me start by playing a scene from the movie. This is the birth of the Fight Club.
We teach a bunch of girls how to defend themselves. They are grateful to us. We build a community. We bond. We share. We connect. We're punching each other. Adrenaline is flowing. Next thing you know, Isabel and Brittany are kissing us on the mouth.
If we do this,
We just run the risk of becoming even bigger losers than we already are right now. And I hate to break it to you, but we're pretty big losers.
And that is the beauty. We are literally at the bottom. We're the lowest of the low.
Okay.
We have nowhere to go but up.
Listen, I think this is a good idea. There's a serious lack of female solidarity at this school.
Not the point, Hazel.
Poor Hazel. Mel, as we heard there, that's our two main characters acting. They're acting in bad faith. They're sort of explicitly sort of acting in bad faith. They've got this absurd idea. They're going to start this fight club to hook up with girls. Just describe for a moment the friendship between PJ and Josie and the increasingly uncanny world that they're living in.
you know, they are, as the film says, bottoms, but they like to point out that, you know, they're not losers because they're gay. They're losers because they're ugly and untalented and gay, which is an important distinction that the movie makes repeatedly. You know, God forbid you be ugly and untalented in addition to being gay, and you know that they are these kind of teen loser friends who have each other, have these kind of mutual pining crushes for these very stereotypical hot cheerleaders, and they exist in this world that feels like this kind of absurdist, extreme take on high school, you know, where a lot of other high school movies are maybe grounded in realism. If you think that Mean Girls was like extreme in its depiction of, you know, the African savannah food fight scene in Mean Girls, this is like that all the time. Like there's just like
Absolutely.
football players in cages for some reason, like all the
And
football
moms.
players and mom and like there's like so many like little background gags, and like you don't know what time period this is supposed to be taking in.
No.
At one point, like a football player uses a phone book to like look somebody up, and it's like this generation has never even touched a phone book, let alone seen one on screen.
Yeah.
So it's this kind of timeless and like extremely silly and horny, but not horny, like high school world that takes everything to like an 11.
I was going to say, like, Madeline, for all the advertising that they've done of this movie, they sort of position it as like this like raunchy, sort of shocking movie. But I think the biggest shock you get is actually like the very bloody fight scenes. What did you make of those fight scenes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so funny when you hear the director, Emma Seligman, talk about this film. She talks about trying to get producers on board for it and going to these meetings with Rachel Sennett, who's also an executive producer, also the star of the film. And they sit down and people are so confused by it because they're like, wait, they're actually going to punch each other? And they're like, yeah, of course they are. And there is a sort of like involuntary laugh that happens when you see these fight scenes because they're so slapstick, and they're also kind of brutal. Like,
They're
everybody's
brutal.
bleeding.
Yeah.
Everybody is bruised. There are like bloody noses. There's bloody eyes. Like, they're kind of have each other in chokeholds. It's intense. And I think it's also super stylized. Like,
Yeah.
Emma Seligman has said that Edgar Wright was an inspiration for some of these fight scenes, which you can totally see. I think, like, it's stylized in a way that is really similar to, Scott Pilgrim versus the World, in that it feels like a comic book. And you can hear it in that score, too, that's done by a couple of people, but including Charlie XCX.
Yes.
That score sounds like a video game. And a lot of the movie kind of feels like a video game. And the stakes sometimes feel like a video game, because it does kind of feel like, at any point, we can just start over. Like, everybody's faces are kind of magically healed, even as they're socking each other in the face.
Although I was going to say, like, the montage of, like, as this fight club is going really well, is just everybody picking up more and more bruises, right? Like, it's just like, as we just kind of keep cutting to these, like, little, like, knowing looks that people are sharing. And there's just more and more bruises, particularly, again, on poor Hazel's face. Listen, this movie is described as a teen sex comedy, but maybe this is to Madeline. There wasn't a whole lot of sex in this. Like, yes, there were a lot of fight scenes. Were they supposed to be a satisfying replacement for sex scenes here, or was it a missed opportunity for you to also have sex scenes?
Oh, man. I mean, I just think, like, of so many classic, like, sex scenes in teen movies.
Yeah.
The Superbad one comes to mind.
Yeah.
Even a more recent example is Booksmart, where one of the queer characters in Booksmart is sort of fumbling and finds the wrong hole in the midst of that sex scene.
Yeah.
And so I know from these sort of, like, crazy minds that they would have come up with something so brilliant and so absurd and so silly that I wish we had seen it. But at the same time, there is a kind of intimacy that happens in these fight scenes that I think is totally surprising and really exciting and electrifying. There are a couple of moments where the two main characters get to actually be, like, body on body with their crushes, and you can feel how excited they are.
Electrically shocked, like the way that was shot. It was like I was excited for them. Totally get,
slow motion, all sorts of music swelling. It worked.
100%. Mel, allyship is this running joke in the movie, right? Like, Rachel Sennett's character, PJ, says that she's using, female solidarity to seduce her crush. The Fight Club's advisor is played by Marshawn Lynch, who has, let's say, a flawed approach to being an ally. That's the least we can say here. What did you think about the way that this movie sort of used allyship and explored the issues of allyship?
I really appreciated it, actually, because, I think that we see in a lot of queer and trans media, allyship is kind of given as this one-note thing. It's like, you are supportive, you are an ally, you're a good person, and you're there. And I think in real life, queer people, trans people, women, there's a lot more complicated thing about that. And there's ways to be a good ally, but also use allyship, like, exploitatively and performatively and all sorts of things. I think one of my favorite jokes in the movie is something that Io's character says to Marshawn Lynch's character when asking him to be their fight club supervisor. And it's like, you can just say you are and show up and not do anything. That's allyship. And it's, like, so funny. It got such a huge laugh in my crowd because it's true. And, like, that's, like, the experience of allyship I think a lot of people see in real life. And that's one of the things I really appreciated about this movie is it feels, even as it is very timeless in its production design and in a lot of things, it also feels very, very grounded in this kind of current moment, the current, like, young generation, and how the people younger than me, frankly, interact with identity politics in kind of complicated and thorny ways. It's not black and white, and I really, really appreciated that.
I mean, they even get punished for being bad allies. When it's exposed that this is the root of the origin of their club, they get, like, on their lockers, it's written "horny freak."
Yes.
And I think, like, that's something that is very much of this moment, like you said, Mel.
Can I just say, I'm so jealous of best friends who have lockers next to each other because I never had that in school.
Oh my God.
And every time that this happens in movies, I'm like, how did you guys get this? Because I had to cross the entire school to be at my friends' lockers. That is neither here nor there. Yeah. Okay, so the director and co-writer of this movie is a young Canadian filmmaker. Madeline, you already mentioned her name, but her name is Emma Seligman. She's a big fan of teen sex comedies. She told Tom Power on Q that she wasn't trying to upend the genre with queer characters. She just wanted to center them. I wanted to play you a bit of their conversation.
I think once you start to think too hard about, well, what does the identity of these characters represent, or what does them being queer mean, or how does that make this different? It starts to get in the way of the creativity and of the storytelling and of like, well, what do these characters want? Like, I think that is what maybe feels different or groundbreaking, is seeing queer characters, for us at least, like just be horny and flawed, as opposed to, how can we change this genre? It's more like, how can we sort of alter how we've seen these characters on screen?
Madeline, what do you think you just heard there?
I mean, I think it's brilliant, because I think if you ask for these characters to mean anything more than what you see, you're going to be asking, you're going to leave very disappointed. They're ridiculous and they're stupid and they're losers in a way that I find exciting and fun. I mean, I think like, when you watch a film like Superbad, which is this movie is clearly riffing on and clearly interested in and inspired by, you can see that there are these sort of like stock characters that is expected in a kind of movie like this. There is the brash, ridiculous, overconfident person, in this case, Rachel Sennett, and there's the like goofy, slightly anxious person who gets kind of dragged along into the nonsense as well, but loves it just as much. And I think like getting to make those two stock characters queer, they're not Michael Cera and Jonah Hill, is really, really exciting for me. But like, you can't really expect them to be anything more profound than that. Like, they are not, throwing bricks at Stonewall. They're trying to kiss the girls they like.
Yeah, Melly doesn't feel, it doesn't feel like this movie's trying to be revolutionary. And like, that's the thing that makes it revolutionary in a way. Like the idea that queer characters have always kind of been outside of these ways of telling stories, particularly the teen sex comedy, particularly like the ability to just be a weird, like a horny weirdo on screen. And now you get a chance to live this out with this movie, right?
Oh, 100%. And I also think that, even like when I was growing up as a teen, having a gay person in it was like a thing. I was a Glee teen. That was like what I had. I had Glee.
Yes.
And now I'm so glad that we're able to make so many different things. And we'll talk more about this, but like, there's such a broad expanse that we can have a weird indie horny freak budget movie like this exist in the same world that we have like Heartstopper or all these sorts of things. And I think that's like the true kind of goal of queer and trans representation. We're not trying to find like quote unquote good. What is capital G good representation on screen? I just want lots. And like this movie, I want excess. I want just piles and piles and piles of it so I can see terrible, mean, ugly, untalented queer characters on screen, in addition to the heavenly, saintly, built to create empathy in straight audiences characters. I want both of them, and I'm so glad that like we're getting both of them.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. I want to talk about that in just a moment, but I just want to first tell folks that if you're just tuning in, my name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. The show you listen to is called Commotion. Today on the podcast, we're talking about the new movie Bottoms with Mel Woods and Madeline Ducharme. Madeline, I want to broaden the conversation a little bit because Bottoms comes after like the summer of so many great queer stories that are being told on screen. Like we got shows like Heartstopper. There's bisexual representation in The Summer I Turned Pretty. Exo Kitty, the movie Red, White, and Royal Blue. Those were all big hits. You wrote a piece for Slate about a bunch of these shows, which are mainly for teenage audiences. They don't exist on the fringes. Like these are big sort of commercial hits. Why do you think young people are gravitating towards these stories right now?
I mean, you can just look at the numbers. Every generation is queerer than the next, but the current generation of young people are super queer. And many of them are out and have been out for a long time. And they want to see that reflected on TV in general. I also think that like right now we're seeing an opportunity for tons and tons of queer creatives, writers. I mean, the fact that Heartstopper started as an online webcomic and now that same webcomic author is making the actual show. Like there's just way more opportunity now for queer creatives. And I think that it's, there's a real spotlight on queer creatives in general, because I think, cynically, there are a lot of queer people out there. And I think people are like, hey, this is a whole untapped market that we need to tap into and make content for sure.
Madeline's like, don't get it twisted. It's because there's money to be made in these
No, I
audiences
mean-
now, right? Like,
It always
A
comes
little-
back to capitalism. It always
I'm
does.
loving it. I'm loving it.
Yeah.
At least the money making is fun for me. But let's keep this in mind.
all right, well, Mel, maybe last question to you. We got about a minute left here. It does kind of feel like we're at a turning point for queer coming of age stories. How would you say you've seen them change over the last few years?
You know, I think that a lot of queer and trans storytelling on screen for a long time was gay people exist and you should treat us as human beings. And now, thankfully, you know, we've moved a little bit past that. And we've also moved past like these kind of unrealistic depictions of, you know, friend groups that only have one gay person in it. It's like, I don't know any straight people. Like, I only have gay friends. So except for you, Elamin. Except
thank
for
you.
you.
I was going to say, I'm here. Yes.
And, you know, like you look at something like Heartstopper and you're getting, you know, a gay storyline, you're getting bisexual storylines, you're getting, you know, a really grounded storyline about a trans kid that's not about being trans. It's about how she wants to go to art school and abandon her boyfriend. And it's like, that's realistic. And those are the storylines that I'm so glad that we're able to be getting. And what we're able to get horny lesbian fight club movies also. Like, that's the world that I want to live in and not have these things be grounded in coming out, trauma, transitioning, you know, these kind of tiny moments in queer and trans people's lives when really our lives are so much bigger and more expansive, and that deserves to be depicted on screen. And I think we're moving somewhat slowly, but we're getting there towards a world where that works.
Mel Woods,
I want all those.
Madeline Ducharme. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show to talk about Bottoms. Everyone should go see Bottoms. I'm going to go see it again. I just loved it so much. Thanks
Everybody
again.
go see Bottoms.
Thanks for being
And
on
then
the
go
show.
see it again. Thank you. Bye.
See you guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Madeline Ducharme is a writer and podcast producer for Slate, based in Washington, D.C. Mel Woods is a senior editor at Extra Magazine in Vancouver. Bottoms is screening in select theaters now. And guess what? You can hear director Emma Seligman's whole chat with Tom Power on Q tomorrow. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. You're listening to Commotion. Listen, ever since I was little, I sleep with the fan on. It's not really for the air. It has nothing to do with the air. It is for the noise. I find that comforting. The only way I can sleep is with the white noise on. Some people need their white noise to fall asleep. Some people need it while trying to focus on work. And increasingly, in order to get what they need, many, many people switch on a white noise podcast. These are podcasts that are just audio of soothing sounds that can loop for hours, designed to drown out unwanted noises, or maybe help you calm down. Like, I don't know, a crackling campfire. Or I don't know, maybe crashing ocean waves is your jam. Or if you're trying to work, maybe you're a busy cafe kind of guy. People listen to 3 million hours. 3 million hours of white noise podcasts on Spotify every day. And while you think Spotify would be happy to have that many people tuning in, white noise podcasts have caused a huge headache for Spotify, and it's an expensive one. We're talking like $38 million a year expensive. Ashley Carman is a reporter for Bloomberg, and she's written about Spotify's white noise problem. Ashley, welcome to Commotion.
Hi.
I'm so happy to have you here. Listen, you first started writing about white noise podcasters on Spotify last year. Why? What got you so interested in them?
It was funny. It was totally by happenstance. I was home with COVID for the first time. I love white noise. I wanted to put on some white noise to distract me from the miserableness. And because I cover podcasting, I put one on and I heard an ad in the show, which was advertising Spotify's podcast platform called Anchor. And when I heard that, I was like, that's so interesting. These folks are putting ads in their show to advertise for Spotify. And just because I cover the space, I recognized that was sort of like interesting and different.
Yeah.
And then it turned out to be actually a story that has continued to go on for over a year. So guess the instinct was right.
Yeah, you thought you were going to write one story about this, but no, it's a story that keeps on giving. What did you find out about, how much money white noise podcasters are making from Spotify?
Yeah. So at the time that I published that first story, This was in June of 2022. I reached out to a couple podcasters, one of whom said that they were making around $18,000 a month.
Oh my
through
God.
the White Noise podcast.
Did you say a month? Can you say it again? $18,000
Yes,
a month.
$18,000 a month.
Okay. All right. I have processed this. I'm ready. Continue.
Yeah, and just to give you a sense of, I want to give you a sense of the scale. So at the time, that podcaster was saying that they received around 50,000 listens per day, which according to someone I spoke to that's in the podcast space, would have put them in the top 25% of all podcasts at that time.
Oh, wow. That's astonishing figures. Like every podcaster would dream of numbers like that. How is this possible? How are they making all of this money?
Yeah, so in this case, it was advertisements for this podcaster. And he said that he essentially, at the time, this platform was called Anchor. Yeah. It is a service that allows podcasters to create shows and host them for free through Spotify. It is now called Spotify for Podcasters. But at the time, he was having ads placed and managed by Anchor itself. And Anchor has a offering called ambassador ads, which are essentially host-read ads. So, the host of the show reads the ads. Yeah. And they are in-house ads. So they are ads that Spotify pays for that advertise Spotify itself. So it's like, hey, I make my podcast on Anchor. You should too. Check it out. And then they get paid for the impressions that receives from Spotify.
But because so many people are tuning in, that's how they get paid.
That gets kind of expensive, yeah.
Hey, I couldn't help but notice that a bunch of the podcasters, the White Noise podcasters you wanted to talk to, they wanted to stay anonymous. What is going on with that?
Yeah, I don't know. I can imagine maybe you don't want to call attention to your amazing business. I don't know. But yes. I was very happy I got to speak to two podcasters.
Now, do you think Spotify could have anticipated this becoming a problem for them? Like, is this something that they could have foreseen in their planning? Because they wanted to pay podcasters. That's the thing that they wanted to do. And of course, white noise is a space that has existed on the internet for some time. So do you think they could have seen this coming?
It's tough to say. I mean, in music, on the other side of the business, white noise has been an ongoing conversation for many years. It's still a conversation right now. So I suppose if you think that it's already a thing in music, you probably could have seen it coming in podcasting. But at the same time, it's tough to say. I didn't expect it personally. So.
I mean, listen, Spotify makes a lot of money every year, but they don't talk about exactly how much money they make. But still, $38 million, that's got to hurt them, right? It's got to sort of like at least be something that they're thinking about in terms of saying, oh, this is a little bit too much money to be spending on this kind of thing.
Yeah. So just to clarify the story you're referencing. So after I published that first story about the $18,000 a month and how popular these podcasts were, it's been over a year. So this was in August of this year. Yeah. I published a story about an internal document that I viewed that essentially laid out a priority, a plan to basically de-emphasize these podcasts. Spotify considered banning them from the platform. They wanted to de-emphasize them in the algorithm just because so much attention was going to them. And these podcasts were costing Spotify $38 million in annual gross profit a year. So is that a lot of money? I mean, right now, all companies are really being pushed for profitability over growth. And Spotify at this moment is not profitable. So if that's the ultimate goal, you're probably going to try to find cost savings / the ability to make additional money as much as possible. So that is probably why this became an important focus for them.
First of all, shout out to you for being so well sourced. You're like, yeah, I viewed this document and being very chill about it. That's a great scoop. Congratulations for that. But also, last week you broke the story that Spotify is going to change the way it pays ad revenue to podcasters. What's the thing that's going to be different?
Yeah. So after I published that story about the $38 million, a Spotify spokesperson said that they never followed through on this plan. White noise podcasts are still live on the platform, which is true. So then last week, at the end of last week, Spotify made an announcement. They emailed creators to say that they are going to be changing how they monetize these podcasters, all podcasters, basically, that use their platform. And I found out through someone familiar with the situation that basically they are no longer going to allow white noise podcasters to monetize through those ambassador ads I talked about, those hosted ads. So basically, Spotify won't pay these podcasters out of their budget.
Okay. I mean, that's a huge scoop because that does change this landscape of how they're doing this. Ashley, I appreciate you being here. We're going to keep talking about this because I'm so curious about white noise podcasters. In the meantime, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks.
Of course. Ashley Carman is a reporter for Bloomberg and writes the Soundbite newsletter covering all things audio. She was in New York. And that is it for our show today. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. Hey, I'm going to be here tomorrow. We're going to do this again, all over again tomorrow. I hope to see you then. Goodbye.